everybody, and welcome to Ideas Sin. My name is Denise, and I am so excited because today I get the luxury and the opportunity to have my brother on the show today. And so this is going to be a lot of fun because obviously I grew up with the guy, and so he knows a lot about me. I know a lot about him, and so I get a chance to talk to him about something that he's always had a passion for. And I've seen it and I've been able to share in that passion. And it's been a lot of fun. So I'm going to introduce to you my brother, Christian, who goes by Chris, but sometimes I'll call him Kitian. So in the event that you hear that, just realize that that's what I used to call him when I was a little girl before I could roll my R's. It was just Kitian instead of like Christian or Chris. So, so here's my brother, Chris.
Hey everyone, I'm very glad and excited to be on this show to talk about passions and like what drives. And once again, being here with my sister, growing up together, we've experienced a lot of highs and lows. So I don't know, it's easy. It's a good chat. It's a good, it's not anything different than what we normally talk about. So I'm very glad to be here. Very glad to be a part of this experience. And very excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, me too, because I have no idea where it's going. So yeah, but I mean, one of the things that I've always like known you to do is to play video games, which a lot of people can relate to. And there's always like mixed opinions about playing video games. And so it's funny because like I used to play video games with you and then you decided to go to school for like video game programming and all of that. But what initially even got you attracted to video games? Like of all the random toys and activities we used to do, like why video games?
That I thought of it myself. Like what was the first one? What was that one game, that one thing where it was like, you know what, that was it. And I've narrowed it down to actually three different games, but for their own individual reasons. So way back when, I guess what was like the first like, sticking my toe, in the water of it was way back. Pokemon.
Oh yeah.
Pokemon Red,
yeah.
Blue, and what I got was Pokemon Yellow.
Yeah.
And I remember that was the one thing after seeing it that I reached out to my parents. I'm like, hey, like this one. Like I know we both know that they were planning on getting us like something like that. So I was like, you know what? This one here, this nice little special edition,
Yeah.
But that was the first like dip into just video games as a concept as a whole. I do remember like some old Atari like further back, but it's hardly memorable. But with Pokemon, playing Pokemon Yellow and going through the game and playing it all, it was a good introduction. With Pokemon Yellow, though, that more so got me more interested into Pokemon like as its own category rather than gaming. But it did say that, oh, hey, video games, they're not bad. Like I'll be open to it. And so moving further on, it goes to like, what is it, PlayStation 1. We had a PS2, we had a PS1, and we would play on it, but it was never once again really enough to get me hooked. But what did get me hooked was a few years forward. This is when it was, Xbox, PS2, and things like that, and GameCube.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one.
Yep. And I wanted to get a GameCube because our friends had it. They were playing Super Smash Brothers, and I was like, yeah, I wanted to, get that, be, in that. So I remember Pop took us to. Oh no, I don't know if you were there with us or if it was just me and him, but we went to the military base, the postal exchange, and we're like, all right. So we go in, and it was like there were no GameCubes; they were sold out. There were some PlayStation 2s and all that, and I was like, damn, like this sucks. Like this, like it was a little soul crushing. And Pop was like, oh well, hey, here's this thing. It's like we can get you an Xbox. I was like, yeah, I guess, yeah, let's do it. Like whatever. And like, yeah, it wasn't like at that time and looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, that was a little kid, the naivety of being a kid. But I got it, and it came with like an introductory demo. There was like a Star Wars game on it. But then I ended up getting a nice little game called Halo,
Mhm.
and that playing through that experience was that initial, like with Pokemon where it was like dipping my foot in the water, Halo was like the plunge in. Like that was, fully I'm like, okay, this if this is what it can be, then I'm all in for it. Like video games, like that's when it took off. And then following Halo, there were other games that also appealed to my interests. One of them was Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind. I remember playing with
I don't
my
know that
cousin.
one.
Morrowind,
I don't remember
the
that one.
Skyrim one.
Oh,
Ah, okay.
Skyrim.
It
Okay.
was when it was the one me and Justin, my cousin, like really got hyped about. It was the game that we both stayed up till like 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and then mom got mad at us because we were running up the phone
I
bill.
know, right?
So, but that just opened it even further. That was another deep dive because it was like, all right, Halo, it's good. It has a, story. It's first person shooter. But with, Morrowind, that's an RPG. That's like that opens up another door of possibilities. And it was really with the Xbox where a lot of doors started opening with different genres of games, game mechanics and things like that. And so that's what started my love for gaming as just a general whole. Now, what really defined it, or what really narrowed it down, though, to a more specific meaning of video games, it wasn't on the Xbox. It was a PC game called Battlefield 1942, and it was like the Game of the Year edition. It had all the DLCs, so like everything was there. It was like
What's a
about a year
DLC?
old, so it was downloadable content.
Okay.
That would be for that game. That's like extra maps, factions, new weapons, and there were I think two at that time. So, and by that time it was well patched, so it was the perfect like starting point. And what made Battlefield different than any of the other games, especially in the first-person shooter market, because that's where it was tailored, it was the sheer like scale and scope. Where if you're playing Halo, it's very linear. There's only a certain amount of enemies at a time. Uh, but with Battlefield, the maps were wide in scale. It was like as, wide scale open combat and things like that. And there were AI doing their own individual things and the mechanics and all of that. And when I played it, of course, like that, opened up more doors of like why I liked gaming in general. But with Battlefield, it made me interested in how video games worked. How did they make this? Like, how did this even happen? Like, how are you able to do all of these things? And that's what really inspired me to go into gaming in a more like technical, nitty-gritty sense, to find out the workings of it, the mechanics. And from there, um, after those 3 games, it just by that point, gaming was like a huge passion of mine. It was, going into something that I really cared about. And I wanted to just know more about it and be more involved in it. And that prompted me to, when I was going to college, at first I was like, all right, let me get my, basic classes out, go to community college, knock it out. But I found that they had you can get like a degree in game design. And so when I saw that, I was like, awesome, like that's great. I can get my degree, I can get like an actual formal education. And I delved into it, and a lot of it was, basic, game mechanics, and I was making little flash games here and there, text adventures. Um, but what I learned there really gave me a deeper appreciation for video games even further, because not only the technical aspect of it, but writing a game script, writing, the prompts. Like, if you want to go on a larger scale, just the organization of the company, logistics, like that is a whole business or a whole like, depending on a team that goes behind it. And it's not just of course it's like as the person behind a a computer writing out the code and doing that, but there can be so much more that could be put into it, in regards to production, scale, live action, animated. There's so many possibilities to create a game and have it tailored specifically for anyone or just yourself, like even um, just knowing that all these possibilities are there really is what drove me to follow that pursuit. And although with gaming, with my degree, I didn't end up getting my degree in simulation and programming and all that stuff. Although I'll admit, I didn't really put it to use in a working standpoint. But whenever I play games, I'm able to see them in a different sight, in a different view than the next person, because of just knowing more so how something worked. Like when there's like, let's say, a character who's going through like a little cutscene or going through a hallway and it's an animation, I know it's like, oh, they're loading up the next stage. That would be like the perfect time. And like all these little
Mhm.
things that like nobody would consider or think about, or it's like knowing the intricacies of like, let's say, your favorite movie, like knowing how it worked and how in the stage. So having that still be a part of my life and having that like insight really helps me just continue delving into my passion. It doesn't really, there's no dryness to the well of interest that comes from it.
Yeah. And what I really appreciate is that I've seen you interact with a lot of these games, and I know you're an intellectual. Like you've always like you always appreciated like technicalities and things, and that's all new. Not all of it is new, but like some
Hmm.
of those viewpoints that you shared are new to me in the way that you would perceive the game. And so, you know, me personally, I know that there are people out there that are like, oh, yeah, they're just wasting time, like playing this game and this and that. And some people do it and they don't necessarily always balance the time that they're playing. And
Yep.
obviously, there's a point where it's like, yeah, you can play and really enjoy it and get lost in the storyline and all of this. But then once it starts, uh, diving in and affecting your everyday life, then it's like, okay, you got to balance that out. So it's gotten a bad rap for it.
Hmm.
But you and I have, interestingly enough, like my one of my old jobs was working at a startup where we used a video game like software to treat cognition. And so
Hmm.
that software was recently approved by the FDA to help treat kids with ADHD, and has actually been released into like the app markets actually recently for adults as well. Um, so like a lot of people don't understand that when you're in a video game, you are still stimulating different parts of your brain. You're still stimulating your memory, your recall, your processing speed, because again, like you have to constantly keep your eyes open for different types of stimulus. So when you're playing a game, what is now that your mind already knows the technicality is of how the game actually works, like
Hmm.
what is your mind kind of going through whenever you're in a game?
When I'm in a game, now and then, like it's changed over the years, over time. At first, before starting my education into gaming, it was more so just enjoying the experience, just being a kid playing video games and just having fun. And then when I started my education, it started to narrow in on, once again, the technicalities, the how-tos. And then after that, it really kind of, I guess, broadened further back up. So when I play, let's say when I play video games, one of the things I do or that I love more about gaming is like the immersion of it. So let's say I'm playing a first person shooter. By default, almost all of them have like a little crosshair at the center of the screen that you can see and it helps you point and aim. I would turn that off
So is that like,
because it,
to explain it, that's like a target, right?
yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
A target that you see on the screen, if you put that over like anything, that's where it's going to go. Um, so I turn that off. Why? Because like I like, the more immersive feeling of not having it there. If there's like, let's say your heads up display that gives you information, I'll remove as much unnecessary ones as possible so that I can get more screen space. Um, with settings, if it's a game I'm rather familiar with, I'll increase the difficulty for it to give that extra challenge. Uh, but pretty much trying to make it as the most immersive experience as possible. Because even in that mode, I'm still able to, still pick apart those little details of, oh, this is how they made this, or this is how they did that, or the mechanics of it. But it still allows me to go further into the game itself and just enjoy it as an experience.
Yeah. And so I have like I have two questions already lined up, but can you
Yeah.
explain like first person, second, and third for people?
Okay, so first, second, and third person, I'll use an example. So let's say we're at an archery range, all right? And you're there, you have a bow and arrow, and you have a target that's like, 100 feet away. So in first person mode, if this was a video game and it said this is a first person video game, you would actually be from the first person perspective of the character itself. So you would see your hands holding the bow. When you pull back the arrow, you're looking directly. It's as if in real life. Like if you were to do this in real life, we see in a first person perspective. So a first person video game would follow the same, direction of it. Third person is where it is like, let's say, over the shoulder. You see the character itself. There may still be a crosshair relative to where they're looking at, but you can see their stuff. You'll see a lot of this in role-playing games, sports games, things like that, where you can actually see the character, their outfits, and everything. Second person is not a perspective that's used. For example, second person in that scenario would be the bullseye perspective.
Okay.
So instead of seeing you shooting the arrow at the bullseye, you're the bullseye seeing your character shooting an arrow at you.
Hmm.
So it doesn't, there's no practical, well, as far as I know, use for that in a video game.
Yeah. And then the third person is just like a higher level view of the person.
Yes, like you're not looking at it from like the character's perspective. You're looking at it as if like there's a camera behind them. Like
Mhm.
you'll see it with like Legend of Zelda, and like those kinds of games, platformer games especially.
Yeah. And what's a platformer game?
Okay, so oh sorry, a little cat here.
Yeah, cats.
Platformer is a genre game. Think of, let's say, Super Mario Brothers. You're jumping literally from platform to platform to get from point A to point B. It can also be an element of gameplay for another genre of video games. Like you'll see platformer elements in, let's say, an adventure game or a role-playing game. Even in a first-person shooter game as well. That can also be an aspect of it.
Mhm. And so from your like schooling and education or even just from like your own experiences, like what game do you think is the most challenging typically to put together? Like does it, you know, is there difficulty in actually creating a first person versus like a third person game? Like are there differences in how you put that stuff together or is it all just kind of the same thing?
Um, well, it really also goes about with how you approach it. Let's say for the first and third person perspective. Thankfully, a lot of video game engines, which is the software that is used to create the environment, game assets, the programming, and all of that stuff, they will include a first person and a third person camera option. So let's say if you put a character on a map, you can go to one of the settings and say, oh, I want this in first person. And then the system will automatically go in a first person mode or third person. So that also just goes more in some games, you can do both. In, Elder Scrolls, you can go in a first person mode or, you push a button and it, zooms back out to third person.
And are there advantages to seeing your character in through the first person versus third? Like what are the pros and
That
cons to both of those?
it's very much on also a case by case. It depends also on the game itself. There are some games where having a first person perspective would be, let's say, too disorientating, or let's say in a role playing game, where you have this character who you buy all this new armor and all these new outfits, but you can't see them. So it's, um, so with those two, like it really depends on the type of game that you want to have, and that's also up to the creator. It's like, do they want it to be a first or third person just because that was the direction they wanted to go in? There are some like games where they would naturally work in a third person setting. There are games where it would work naturally in a first person, and there are some where it's flexible enough that you can do both.
Mm, okay. And so when you're playing these games and then you turn back to the real world, how do you think that it's
Mhm.
affected your perspective on life?
Hmm. Um, oh man, how it affected it in life. That is a good
I
one.
know, life questions.
It's yeah, damn it. I didn't the curveball here. Okay. With real life, it's kind of given me a little more of an appreciation for, I guess, once again, the technicalities of, how the real world works. Um, let's say if I'm just driving down the street, I look over and I see like this, huge skyscraper. I think, man, like what did they have to do to get that done? Like not just construction, not just like, but there had to be paperwork. There had to be like,
Paperwork.
when did it go? Like, how did it
Yeah,
go
yeah.
from like someone being like, "Hey, I want a building here," and then one just pops up immediately? Um, just the whole process of that, and just things that like also um, we as people and as humans have been able to accomplish with just our engineering, our science, and like things of that nature, and just how intricate it can actually work, but it still somehow flows together.
Yeah. And it's funny because you say that, and I'm exactly the same way. Like, I'll go to different areas and I'll start looking at the architecture of things. And sometimes I'm like counting the beams and I'm looking to see where the beam placement is and the lighting or the windows and this, like, yeah, I do the same thing, which is actually really funny that we both kind of think of that. But I was laughing because you started off with like the paperwork. I never even think about the paperwork. I'm like, what kind of materials is this and
Yeah,
this and that? But
no
yeah,
one
you're
ever
right.
does,
You're right.
and for that, like that was when that's something I learned in school of like, oh yeah, there's nothing stopping you from downloading free software and like creating a game yourself. But if let's say there's like a AAA, title that comes out, there was a company that like a team of, it could be hundreds of people, multiple studios across the world, all collaborating in like their own office, which also they had to file paperwork for their own office. So like and then somebody filed paperwork to make that building. So it's like it's a rabbit hole. But
A lot of paperwork.
that's that's a yeah, that's just more of like the ADHD like rabbit hole going down, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. Where did it get the paper? And
Yeah. What
and
about
I
the
don't
origin of paper and trees and then
know.
diving into nature?
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Well, I mean, and speaking of paper, like we're not even talking about the money that it takes to actually
Hmm.
make this stuff. So, from your perspective or just like your own knowledge or what you've studied, like how much does it take to make a game or even from your own research, how much or what was the most that anybody's ever paid for to create a game?
Ooh, so as for the most and like the most expensive video game to be created, I don't know offhand, but one of the joys about video gaming is that you can you can work with whatever budget that you have available most of the time. Like once again, like if you say I want to make a video game right now, you can go online, you can download like a free, and thankfully a lot of these are engines and like these programs are open source, meaning it's available to the public. You just download it, you have access to it. Many times they'll have like a forum for you to post your game creations so that other people can see it. Or perhaps like I know with, PC, you can probably have like your own standalone um, copy of the game, and you can just post it to, let's say, Steam or the Origin Marketplace or like whatever platform that can support it.
And what is Steam?
But if
Oh,
you, oh, Steam is a company. They're known for, well, actually, I've never used Steam. I haven't played PC, so it's pretty much a marketplace to purchase a wide variety of games. They'll have their sales, and it's a very popular platform for PC gaming.
Hmm. Okay. So yeah, so then it seems like when it comes to creating a game, a lot of it is just like your own skill set or the skill set of the other people around you. And you can still
Hmm.
make like a really good game if you have the right people or skill sets yourself and just use the open source platforms and then just share it with people to get feedback. I'm guessing, get that user
Hmm.
experience testing in, and then just kind of develop it from there.
Exactly. Yeah. And with gaming, it's something that it's up to you whether or not you want to continue supporting it after releasing it. Like you said, you can always go back, patch it, you can add more content to it, you can um, just pretty much make a sequel, make a prequel, do another version of it, do a reimagining, do a spin-off of it. Like there's so many things that you can do, and it doesn't require like as many resources. I mean, it may also it'll take time, of course, depending on how much time you put into it, how much time it'll take for it to be complete by, your standards when you think it's okay to release out to the public. That's entirely dependent on you. If like, especially if you're doing this freelance or if you're making an independent video game. Of course, if it's like, let's say a company like let's say BioWare, Electronic Arts, like one of the big corporate ones that would release a AAA title, they're also following more of a business model. They have certain quotas to meet. They have certain like quarterlies. So for them, depending on some of the studios, they would have to release something to keep business going.
Yeah. And so you've said AAA twice. What does that mean when it comes to video games?
So those are probably the most mainstream games that you would see. It's the games that you would see commercials on in
Like
TV, the ones that you
Madden
would
or
see ads
something?
in. Madden, Call of Duty, NBA, like it's something where like you can approach like many people about and be like, "Oh, hey, have you heard of Call of Duty or have you heard of, Madden?" And if it's, let's say for Madden, if it's you're talking to a sports person, they probably know of the game at least. Whereas a smaller game like in fact, there was a great independent game that I played was Undertale, and it's a very unique and creative game. I'm not going to go into details of it, but it may not be more known to the general public. It'll have its fan base, of course, but you're not going to find as many people knowing what Undertale is versus like let's say Call of Duty or Madden.
Yeah. And so
But
Mhm.
regardless of how well known in the public it is or not, it doesn't determine, for example, with Undertale, it's a smaller, not as known game, but it was one of my favorite games. Like it was a great, experience to go through. So it's not always the most popular is the most, I don't, it's subjective, but good. It also
Yeah.
depends on what, your interests are as well. But there's certainly a lot of diversity that comes with video games as a whole.
Mm. And so where would you look to find these independent games? If that's all you're used to is seeing the commercial products or what's in a store, or what's in the main, I don't know, like gaming apps.
Yeah, it really to start off with, I would also like what platform are you going to use? Are you going to use a computer for your gaming? Are you going to use an Xbox for your gaming? Are you going to use a PlayStation for your gaming? uh, Even on your phone. Like, find out what platform that you want to use for your game experience because some games are only limited to PC or they're only limited to PlayStation, only limited to Xbox. So find out what platform you want to use first, and then from there, I would check out like whatever general marketplace they have. And a lot of these marketplaces, they'll have like an indie game section where it's the smaller games, and a lot of them usually aren't, as expensive as the, main titles that you see, which is also a positive about indie games. Like you can find a really good experience for. $5, $10, or like something much cheaper than like let's say a $60 to $70 video game.
Yeah. And so, just for the non gamers out there, each of these platforms have their own marketplace, right? And they don't necessarily talk to each other. They're not like an open marketplace where it's like, okay, yeah, I go into the PC marketplace to download this game, but it's not transferable to any of the other platforms, right? They're like their own standalone
It
markets, or are there markets that are mixed already?
Well, it used to be like that where, video games would have, certain exclusives, or there's video games that like you just would only be able to play just on PC or just on that. And there are some games and some studios that let's say are licensed or contracted to specific companies. Like let's say um like for example PlayStation, they have their own dedicated video game studio, so anything that they release is going to be under the PlayStation platform. Same thing for Xbox, same thing for PC. But there are more so now than ever, there have now been more cross-platform games where a studio, let's say, once again, like Call of Duty or Battlefield, or they're like, all right, we can afford to reach out to PlayStation, we can release this on PC, we can release this on all of these platforms. So it also makes more of a business sense as well. Like you want to cast a wider net, you're going to get more of an audience. So there's certainly cross-platform titles out there, and more recently there's crossplay as a whole. And crossplay that's coming out in more recent games is where you can have two separate platforms, but you can still engage in the same game. So let's say you have PlayStation, I have an Xbox. We download, let's say Fall Guys. It's a crazy, wacky, fun like platformer. Although we're on two different platforms, we can still join the same lobby. We can, still play the same games despite that hardware difference.
Yeah, I think a few years ago I was in that rut where I was like, "Oh man, my games, my friends are gaming," and then I wanted to play with you and Jasmine, but everybody had different systems, and I was like, "I don't know
Yep.
what to get, and I don't know which one is going to allow me to play with everybody." So I just didn't end up getting one. I mean, I still don't have a TV,
Hmm.
so it goes to show how
Yeah.
much I invested in that. But yeah, that was a tricky part because if you oh, actually, that's going to be a great question. But yeah, for me, that was really difficult because it's like I wanted to connect with different groups of friends and different people, my family, and try
Hmm.
to play these games with you guys, but I couldn't because everybody was using something different. So for you, how has that affected your relationships or your friendships based on like the systems that you use?
Um, Even if anything, I'll go back to um, earlier in the conversation, like when I wanted to get a GameCube, like it wasn't there, so I had to. That was one of the first, obstacles I ran into was not having the hardware to play with my friends who all had GameCubes. However, by going down that route and getting an Xbox, I was introduced to a whole slew of new people who I made friends with on that platform. And I was fortunate enough that, you know, all my friends who had GameCube, they all still lived close. Like we hung out like outside and stuff, in real life. So that wasn't so much a concern. That was being taken care of. But like having a whole new array of people to meet from all over the world and getting their perspectives, having these amazing experiences together, making these amazing memories. It certainly opened up, a whole new window of possibilities and perspectives from so many different people. And that was once again another, thing that I love about video gaming is how it brings people together. And now it's on a global scale. We can play with other gamers from like different nations, different time zones, and all experience like the same game, and have fun together and have these awesome memories to create as well.
Yeah. I remember like we would play Halo and we would be connecting to different
Yep.
people and there's always trash
Hmm.
talking in video games and stuff
Oh
like
yeah.
that, but that's
Oh yeah.
not always the case. And I feel like some people think that when you start playing video games or you get into that world, that it's always a negative thing, that there's always like bullying or there's always like negativity involved. But, from my
Hmm.
experiences, and you obviously have way more experiences, like I didn't encounter that much negativity. And yeah, there's trash talk and this and that, but it would always be balanced
Hmm.
and you still have ways to like mute somebody or block somebody, if anything, or even report them in some of those games, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's always, especially nowadays, there's definitely options to really, decide whether or not you want to engage with that person as a whole. Let's say if we're in a match and, somebody's like giving us a hard time, trash talking, whatever, we can like mute them, block them, and then the next round comes up, or we just join another lobby, and that's it. Like we may not ever see them again. Um, Over the years, like, yeah, I've run into a lot of people and like, trash talkers, people who would like, give you a hard time for like no reason. That's always going to be there. But that can pretty much be said of like any sort of like community. Like any community has like that small minority who can like make it more difficult to experience it. But the vast majority of it though have been positive. Like they've, had some very great moments, some very silly ones, and, had a lot of good laughs.
Yeah. Now, the people that you've met, have you online or like through the video game,
Mhm.
have you ever met any of them in person? I already kind of know this answer, but just in case. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, yeah. There were it was during the Xbox 360, era. Um we were playing Halo 2 and 3. Now, here's the thing. I was on the East Coast. I had a friend who one of them was in Kansas. No, one of them was, yeah, Kansas City, Missouri, and then the other one was in California. So, when after enough time when we hung out together, we decided like, hey, why don't we just let's meet in person. I'll go from like East Coast, they'll go from West Coast, we'll meet right in the middle, you know. And so we did. And I remember it was one of the most exciting but terrifying moments in my life because I'm like, this is gonna be great or I'm not coming home. Like
I know, right?
so, but just and this was like what was so like fascinating was that I wasn't with anyone. Like this was all on my own. Like I bought my own ticket. I did like all that. Like, mom dropped me off at the airport, but after that, that was like, all right,
See ya.
don't die. That's it.
See
I
ya.
am no longer liable for anything that happens to you anymore. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was crazy. But I remember like heading into the airport, walking around, and like we had our phone numbers at that time. We were texting each other saying, "Hey,
Mm,
I'll be here at this time." And like so, we still kept communication, thankfully.
yeah.
But yeah, I ran into the first one from from Cali, and we had our like it was weird because like I didn't even have to ask. Like I just like I saw them, and I kind of knew I'm like, yeah, it's probably this person. And then yeah, we introduced ourselves by our gamer tags to see that to see that it worked.
Yo,
Um,
gamer tag 54, I don't know, chubby
Yo,
donut
Blaze at 420, how's it going?
flavor
And
$4.20.
it's like, sir, I work here. This is a Wendy's. It's like, ah, okay,
Oh, wrong
excuse me.
one.
But yeah, but we did that. And then we met our third friend and same thing, confirmed gamer tags, and like we hung out for a week and like we played this it was a copycat of like Minecraft, and we spent all week same thing just gaming. And like we went out, we checked out some tourist places, went out to eat and all that stuff. But like it was it was crazy like knowing that I'm in the middle of the country with just random people who I've spoken to online, and like we're just doing the exact same thing, we're just gaming. But it was a definitely an exciting experience, definitely a memorable one.
Yeah, and you've known them for a
uh
long time too before you went out,
yeah,
right? Like for
yeah,
a
it
few
was
years, I think.
a few years, yeah. It was definitely some time. So, and it was something that we were talking about. Like, it was always like, oh yeah, it'd be cool. Like, it was, casual wishing, but like over time, it was like, hey, we could technically do this. And then
Mhm.
we planned it out for like a month, getting all the details in, everything scheduled, and then it just worked out.
Yeah. And I know some people are probably like, "Oh my god, that's so dangerous," and this and that, and I I don't know. I always say there's kind of like a 50-50 there. It's like you have to use your best judgment, but I'm thinking about it
Hmm.
as, with some of these games, you're not always on video, so you don't see what the person looks like, but I'm thinking
Yep.
about it more and more in the fact that y'all are playing a game and so you're communicating a lot. You're getting to know each other's
Yeah.
personalities a lot. And the other thing too is I know it's not like a high stress situation, but when you're in a game, you can be in such a high stress mode that you're sometimes you're responding and you're reacting, and that is like your initial like authentic self
Yeah.
reacting to stress or or a stressful situation, so to speak. But I feel
Hmm.
like that would kind of give you some insight into how this person deals with stress or how they express their anger as well. So, for you, that probably made it easier to say, like, oh, no, that's fine. Like, I understand how this person's mind works. But,
Hmm.
in real life, like we do that all the time when we go and we meet people or people who are going out on dates. It's like, yeah, you see a
Yep.
profile and the pictures look nice and what they wrote down seems super generic enough to be like, yeah, they sound like a pretty decent person. Like, let me go meet them
Hmm.
wherever. And then you meet this random stranger that sometimes you've only ever had an interaction with like a few times, even just by text.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done that before where I've been on dates with like guys who I've only texted with and I've seen pictures of. And then I meet them in person and I'm like, oh, wow, you're completely different than what I expected. Or, when you mix
Hmm.
alcohol into the situation, like it can go either way. Like I've definitely left a situation because I didn't feel safe. But
Yeah.
I'm only giving this example because I want people to remember that even though like you went and you did that, it's like you've known this person for years. You've talked to them about a lot of things. Because I remember walking in sometimes and you guys were like, yeah, talking about like family stuff or things that were really happening in your life that just you needed to support one another in those moments versus,
Mm.
in real life, sometimes we make connections with people very superficially and we don't connect on an emotional or foundational level. Everything's very superficial, high level stuff. And we're like, they seem like a good person, but it's like, but you've never seen them in a stressful situation or you've never seen how they share emotions or share their struggles and things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that example out there because I know some people might like question that and be like, well, why are you gonna do that? It's like, well, we do that stuff all the time in real life.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
but that's cool. I mean, do you still talk to them or are you still in contact with them?
Not as much, and once again, like it could also just be like I remember one of the reasons why I stopped using Xbox as much was the next generation. I ended up getting a PlayStation 4,
Mm.
and so all my friends who had GameCube had PlayStation 4. So this time I was like, you know what? I can get it. I can afford it this time. I'm not, yeah. And so I started playing more with them, of course, but that was also less time on Xbox. And also just, things like outside of gaming, take effect, changes in work, changes in relationships in real life. That also has a factor, but it really goes down to like somewhat of a balancing act, what you're able to put in, where and at how much.
Hmm. And your wife also plays a game like games as well too. Are y'all using the
Hmm.
same like gaming system or what's that like?
No, no. What we have, we literally from the first time that we started living together, we knew right away that we're not going to share. We're not going to share one TV. We're not going to share
Yeah.
one console. Let's be honest here. Let's be pretty like let's cut the bullshit. We all know what's going to happen.
I know.
So we each got our own TV and we each got our own console and we each have our own setup. And it's been like that since day one. Even now, we have like our long enough couch for both of us, but we have like our two TVs, our two consoles, so we can play whatever we want either together or do our own thing and not have to be concerned about that.
Is she interested in the same games you are?
Some of it, yeah. She also does first person shooters. She loves role-playing games. Right now, she's playing Baldur's Gate 3. Um, it's a fantasy role-playing game that just came out. Highly recommend it. It's really fun. Check it out if you can. And yeah, and like we've also, and that's another thing. We shared games over the years that like our interests have crossed paths. I've started playing, like she's a huge Resident Evil fan,
Mm-hmm.
where it's a series of horror games. I never played it. I never had any experience with it until I started playing that with her, and I was like, all right, I get it. I can see where the appeal is, and I've had some good moments with it. And same thing, she's played games that, once again, Battlefield, like she never played it, but we started playing together, and same thing, like she'll hop on every now and then when, yeah, and then we'll just play that as well. So that's also a nice thing about, gaming is that like you can learn about different things from different people.
Mm-hmm. And how has that affected your relationship? Like, do you think that that's brought you closer because you have a shared interest in something, or do you think because these games can be such solitary experiences at times that it creates like gaps within the relationship?
If anything, it has made our connection like, more, it's made it stronger more so by learning about each other, learning about like you said, like you can learn a lot through somebody in those high tense situations. So let's say when, I'm playing a first person shooter and I'm really into it and I'm getting really intense, like I'll have certain behaviors that like she knows, like she kind of expects, like she knows like what I'm usually going to play. She'll know whether or not I'll be interested in a certain game, like, and vice versa. And of course, with co-op games, that's, of course, us working towards a common goal, working together on things, and that requires a level of communication and teamwork that definitely encourages that team building mentality to reach that same goal. Just finishing games, that have co-op. One game that we played so much together is Resident Evil 6. It's a very goofy game that takes itself too seriously, but that's one of our most played games because we know the mechanics, we know exactly what we're going to do and everything, like, and we play it at higher difficulties and knock it out like it's no problems because we're so in sync in that environment that we pretty much know what the other is going to do.
Mm. Yeah, that's really cool to be able to read each other and just predict each other's like strengths and weaknesses in those different environments. You do complement each other. Yeah, that's pretty
Hmm.
cool. What do you think is her strength, and what's a strength of hers that's a weakness of yours, and then vice versa?
Oh, geez. I guess a oh geez. I gotta make sure.
I know. I mean,
I
and
gotta make
this
sure I
might.
word that. I gotta make sure. Yeah. If anything, in terms of gaming, here's a good example.
Mhm,
Um, let's say Grand Theft Auto 5.
mhm.
We've played that game for years, like across multiple generations. In our, let's say, our friend group or in our little like, team or whatever, she is always the driver. She's like
Yeah.
she beats me in every race. She's like, great on the road and all that stuff. However, whenever there's aircraft, whenever it's flying, I'm the guy who always flies. I'm the pilot at everything. Like everyone,
Mm,
nobody at like that's just in general. Like if there's ever a mission where it's like, all right, who's flying? Everybody points to me.
mm,
So it's a lot of cases like that. Like we'll have let's say in a role playing game, we'll have certain classes. Like she'll pick, she is really great at being a healer of the team. And so she always will get that role, and then I'll usually pick like, some other support role or whatever one that complements the team. But she's always known as the dedicated, like let's say healer, because that's her bread and butter. She's great at it. So
mhm.
we definitely find certain roles that we fit in better than one or the other.
Yeah. And then for role playing games, RPGs, can you just explain that
Mhm.
a little more so people understand like what that difference is between, let me see, like maybe Call of Duty, is that considered an
Mhm,
RPG versus like World of Warcrafts? If
mhm.
just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So role-playing games, um, they cover a wide it covers a wide description. Something that's very familiar in role-playing games is, let's say, the setting. A lot of role-playing games are in a fantasy setting or in a space setting, or something like, variable between the two. You're always controlling, let's say, a character or a group of characters, and it's very narrative driven. Instead of focusing on, small matches and, shooting things, it's more of a longer experience, a longer game, um, more story driven, more character driven as well. There can be, let's say, shooter elements to it where it's like, um, let's say Mass Effect. It is a space role playing game created by BioWare. It is very heavily story driven, character driven as well, but it also has shooting mechanics. So there's also genres of games that can kind of cross over. But in terms of role playing games, it's very much more story driven, more like there's also inventory management for your character, what they wear, what they use, and more so in that aspect. Whereas a first-person shooter, it is more so just that. Like it's more directed at like quick action, quick gameplay, and like those kinds of things, rather than with an RPG, it's a more like longer, drawn-out experience.
Yeah. And so, like, a perfect example of that is, if we look at the basic sports games like the Madden or, the NBA 4K, I'm probably dating
Hmm.
myself because I don't know what version they're at anymore. But they're literally just playing the game. It's like, all right, let's just play one match. And then that's literally it. There's no storyline to it. To your point, it's all just action, right? Versus
Yeah,
an RPG, it's like, yeah, there's the storyline of, oh, yeah, like a Zelda could be like one of those, right? To some extent,
exactly.
because it's a
Yeah.
storyline. You're trying to go save the princess, and there's all this stuff happening.
Hmm.
Uh,
Exactly.
but I guess my question for you is, can some of these like RPGs or story based games, could they actually have an ending, or could you really just play for as long as you want and not really encounter like an ending?
Um, well, you could always like replay the game, and that's one of the benefits of a role-playing game is that you can have different play styles and take different choices in, what characters or like, it gives you more options for replayability. So with role-playing games, it's a good way to delve into it. It's more so get lost in the world. Like you said, Zelda is a good example of that. Um, but you can also just with shooters, that's more of like, hey, I have like let's say a few hours to kill. I just don't want to focus on anything too heavy. I just want to like just kill some time. Um, but with also once again as how role playing games can have a shooter element to it. A lot of first person shooter games have, let's say, a campaign to go through where there is a story and all of that stuff. You're just solving your problems more so with shooting rather than, puzzle solving.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and do you tend to gravitate towards one more than the other, or are you typically just open to whatever game just piques your interest?
There's some that I kind of lean into more, but there are times where I'll just see a game that just gets my attention. I don't know why or whatever it is. It could be a completely different platform or a completely different genre of game, but I'll give it a go and I'll just like, you know, I'll greatly enjoy it either way.
Mhm. And then playing this game, I mean, this is probably something I should have asked earlier, but when you're playing these games, how much do you think it's attributed to your like resiliency and, just that commitment to continue to play, or even your creativity or your adaptive mindset? Can you kind of explain a little bit how that's affected you, or how that's, been positive or negative in your life?
Um, I think it's definitely helped. More so with the like you like you mentioned before, it helps a lot with cognitive like responses and things like that. Let's say with first person shooters, it helps with, physical reflexes, quick thinking, things like that. Puzzle games allow for more like deeper like problem solving and things like that. And that's also stuff that can apply in, real life as well with some of the obstacles that you encounter, just being out there. So there's a lot of positives and like things that could be pulled away. And not only that, it also can spark a creative aspect of you. You play a game that inspires you to delve more into that topic or learn more about that world, and or perhaps you walk away still thinking about a character that you had an interaction with because they had such an impact that like now you want to know more about them. Now you want to go back and replay it to find out or just see them again. So it can certainly leave a lasting impression in a multitude of ways. And it's to just limit it to that. Like there's so many different ways that it can impact that I can't even list it right now if I if I tried.
Yeah. And do you think that there have been any negative consequences from you playing video games?
Um, with that, in terms of negative, there are, from my personal experience, a lot of the negative experience I've had was like, the annoying trash talkers or like the people that ruined like a match or something like that. Um, it has been from time to time. It's also, like you mentioned way back in, time management. You can lose yourself in a game and not do anything else for like let's say that whole day, or like it can get to a point where responsibilities start to falter if you let it get too far. And there are times where I've forgotten to do things or I've put things off to get just an extra hour in or something like that. But over enough time, I've learned more so to try to balance it out, like make sure that any obligations I have are done first, and then I can go into gaming, and then I can do that. Like, try not to. That's really one of the things to keep an eye out for. Just like anything else, like you can put too much time, too much effort in, and then it starts to decline in other aspects of your life. But thankfully, with the time that I've been playing video games and the experience that I've kind of gotten used to a certain like mindset of like just get everything else necessary done first, then relax.
So do you ever set a timer when you start playing just to be like, all right, let me make sure that I don't play for 6 hours unless you've literally like planned it, like I'm going to go ham and get this game done this weekend?
To a point, yeah. There are times where it's like, all right, I have a free weekend, so that's what I'm going to dive into. But it also just comes down to just having like your general schedule. Like, I can play up until like, let's say, if I work on like, let's say today, like I have to start work like at whatever time, and it's like, let's say 9 o'clock, and it's like, all right, so I can put 2 hours into this and then get my other stuff done, and like that's what I have to work with. And then I just follow that and then just go to work. And it becomes like after enough times, it just becomes more of a habit rather than something where I have to sit down and like plan. It can just be something I do like as I go along.
And not have like a timer on the screen or some type of clock that goes off that's like ding ding ding, you got to stop.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the regular clock, sure. That's really all that I really do look at. There are, of course, options like with some games and some platforms, you can do that, and
Okay.
especially it's a great tool for parents if you get your kids a console. Look into that if that's something that you want to, manage as well. I highly recommend it. But no, after enough time, like I just look at the regular clock and be like, hey, do I have to do anything in the next hour? Yes or no, and then go from there.
Hmm. And how much do you end up investing in your gear? Like, do you end up, getting really cool covers for your remotes, or do you end up, I don't know, like decking out your TV with like cool lighting? Like, how much does your personal environment affect how you play?
Um, Over time, yeah, I've invested a few things, a few accessories. Like I have like, the light behind the TV. Um, Not so much, decking out the console, but I got extra storage so that I can save more games on it and not have to like, delete one and then re-download. But that's pretty much the extent of it that I have so far. I mean, it does seem nice. I've seen some really great setups that some other people have had, but I'm pretty content with what I have here.
Yeah. Yeah. You've always been like pretty like minimalistic and just very simple with a lot of things. and then
Hmm.
comparison to like this. I'm pointing to my
I mean, that
background where
looks
there's
nice
like
though. Like,
tons of random ivy. Yeah. No, that's cool. I mean, just talking to you, I mean, it just reminds me of like the Game Boys with Pokemon. And I was just thinking about that,
yeah.
like, man, like it would be interesting to see how well you do playing on a Game Boy uh, from back in the day after you have
Hmm.
played with your video game on like PlayStation and PS4. Like, how has that like how could that potentially change how you play those old school games? Because I'm sure that there's different mechanics to it, and even like the visual stimulation is probably different.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. With games, there's a wide variety of graphics and like art styles and mechanics. Just there's so many different ways to create a game. There's so many ways to go about it. Uh, but after so many years, like I can still go back to, let's say, my Game Boy and still remember how it goes and still remember like what little like paths to take. And that's just from just playing it so much and having it ingrained in my mind so well that it just becomes second nature with some games. I can go back after all these years, pick it up, and like it's like I never left it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like somebody riding a bike. They're like, yeah, I just get back to it and
Exactly.
it's there. Yeah, I really want to get my
Yeah.
Game Boy. It's been a few years that I've been like, man, I want to play my Game Boy. Like, I just want it. And so people are like, you should sell it whenever you get it. I'm like, no, I want to play it. I want to
No.
have it here and just like get lost in it,
And actually use it. Yeah, yeah.
actually use it. Yeah. So I think it's still in storage, right?
I have no idea. I have to check. We'd have to ask.
Yeah. I'll have to check with Pop. You have a YouTube, and so I'll share that in the description. Anything else that you want to let
Oh yes.
people know about or give them any tips or advice?
Mhm. Definitely go check out gaming. I mean, there's such a wide variety of options. There's so many ways you can play, so many things. Just definitely give it a go. See what you find that is fun to you and like explore it. You never know where it's going to take you. You're never going to know who you may, meet and befriend, and you can get a lot of great memories going into it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Geetyan. All right. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you again. And for listeners, check out the description with all of the information that I have. He's got some great little tips and references. But that's it for today. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Bye.